This happened when I was 18. I'm 22 now and live in San Antonio, Texas. It was my senior year of high school, and this was around the time when COVID started to blow up. Everything began to shut down, including my school. Even though everyone was supposed to stay home and quarantine, my friends and I were going out more than ever. There wasn't much to do since all the non-essential businesses were closed. But one thing about me, I love urban exploring, especially haunted places. To this day, I still do. I'm not someone who gets scared easily. I've had a few experiences with homeless people, cults, and even had a gun pointed at me. But nothing compares to how strange and creepy this one particular instance was when I was exploring. Around this time, I started talking to a girl named Clarissa who was in one of my classes. If it weren't for her backing me up on what happened that night, I'm sure none of my friends would have believed me. We were still kind of newly dating, but I somehow convinced her to join me in exploring a wooded park at 3 a.m. here in San Antonio. The park is called O.P. Schnabel. During the day, it's nice, safe, and very scenic. But at night, it can be dangerous. The police usually patrol the entrances to keep people away after dark. In 2016, a 24-year-old woman named Lauren Bump was brutally murdered and stabbed over 20 times in those woods. In 2021, a boy exploring there was shot. Clarissa and I arrived at the park around 3 a.m. It was super creepy and pitch black. The trees blocked out the moonlight, and I didn't like to use my flashlight. If I did, my eyes couldn't adjust to the darkness, and I'd only see what the light shined on. Plus, I didn't want someone to see my light from a distance. So, I kept it off while we explored. We had been walking for about 20 minutes down the main trail, and I didn't plan to stay long because it was so quiet and eerie that night. I knew about a trail that led back to where I had parked my truck. I suggested we take it to make a full circle instead of walking all the way back. Clarissa agreed, so we started walking down the off-road trail. We were only about 2 minutes into the off-road trail when suddenly, out of nowhere, we heard a flute playing. We both stopped in our tracks and looked at each other, listening. The flute played in a beautiful, rhythmic tune, almost like a piece of music. But even though it sounded good, it was creepy as hell. As I mentioned before, I don't scare easily, but 15 seconds into hearing the flute, Clarissa started trembling in fear. She was about to cry. I was just standing there, listening. But when Clarissa started praying to God for help and asking for forgiveness for her sins, I realized how serious the situation was. It was hard to tell where the sound was coming from. It seemed like it was coming from the main trail, which is about 30 to 50 yards away, through some woods. But as the flute played, it started to get louder, and it felt like it was right on top of us. Clarissa couldn't even focus because she was so scared, so I knew I had to do something to get us out of there. It might sound corny, but I told her, "Don't worry, I'm not going to let anything happen to you," and suggested we run down the off-road trail to get away. We took off running, but about 30 feet into it, we heard bushes rustling and twigs snapping. Then, something big dashed across the trail right in front of us. It could have been a deer or another large animal, but it was so strange because I could almost feel the size of whatever was in front of us. I didn't see a shape or silhouette though, and I didn't hear it coming or leaving. I only heard it when it was right in front of us. As soon as we heard that, we turned and ran back toward the main trail. And then, as if the person playing the flute had been waiting for us, the music started again, loud and right on top of us. This time, it sounded like an Irish jig, with the flute playing in a rhythm that was still in cadence. The sound was surrounding us, but it was impossible to pinpoint where it was coming from. At this point, my fight or flight instincts kicked in. We had two choices: either run back down the off-road trail where we had heard the scary noise, or go back to the main trail where the flute was playing. The off-road trail felt scarier because it was darker and surrounded by thicker woods, so I told Clarissa, who was still trembling, to run down the main trail back to my truck. We ran as fast as we could. The adrenaline was pumping, and we turned a 20-minute walk into a 7 to 8-minute jog. Somewhere along the way, the flute noise stopped. As we ran, we passed a random porta potty, and I was terrified someone might be inside or hiding there. It seemed to be right near where we had been earlier, but thankfully we didn't see anyone or signs that anyone had been there. In fact, my truck was the only vehicle near the entrance to the woods. We finally made it to the truck, and I sped out of there as fast as I could. The next day, I told all my friends about what happened and searched the internet to see if anyone else had experienced something similar. I found stories about ghosts, cults, and animals making creepy noises, but no one had mentioned hearing a soft, rhythmic flute solo. Maybe I didn't look hard enough, but I couldn't find anything like it. I tried to think of other possibilities. There were some houses on the edge of the woods, but they were at least a couple miles away. We were deep in the woods, so there's no way the sound could have come from there. I'm telling you, the flute was clear as day, and it was 3 a.m. I never figured out who was playing the flute or what dashed in front of us. Thinking back on it now, it feels more paranormal than anything else. I don't know if it was a person, a ghost, or a cult. I'm hoping someone can explain it logically. Either way, I never went back to those woods at night again. I still explore creepy places, but nothing like that has ever happened again. I'm a 20-year-old guy, and I work as a pharmacy technician at a medium-sized hospital in Northwest Alabama. I work the night shift from 6 p.m. to 4 a.m. I'm also in charge of stocking the surgery rooms. I work for 7 days straight, then get 7 days off. Working the 7 days in a row is tough, but having the 7 days off feels amazing. I work Thursday through Wednesday. On the 6th night of my work week, which was a Tuesday, I left a little early to stay with my wife at her aunt's house. It's about 30 minutes away from our house. She was babysitting her little cousins while her aunt and uncle were on a trip. The house didn't have any curtains, so she felt uneasy being there for the few nights. I didn't go with her at first because it was during my work week, and she told me there wasn't much point if I was just going to get there at 5 a.m. and sleep once the sun came up. But on her last night babysitting, she felt really anxious, so I told her I was coming over. She's stubborn, but she thanked me and felt much better once I arrived. Working night shifts for the past 2 years has really taken a toll on me mentally, and I think I've developed some slight insomnia. I couldn't sleep at all after getting to my wife's aunt's house. This isn't new for me, but I'd never stayed awake for more than 28 hours before. Even though I wanted to sleep, I couldn't because we had a busy day ahead. We had to drop her little cousins off at school, go to a gender reveal party, shop for groceries, since she had been away for a few days, and I had to be at work by 6 p.m. I ended up falling asleep in the car for about 10 minutes. I felt that wave of sleepiness, but I had a Red Bull and another energy drink to help me stay awake when I got to work. My wife drove me to work and picked me up because my brakes needed to be fixed, and we didn't trust me to drive after being awake for over 24 hours. It was Wednesday night now, and I had been awake since 2 p.m. on Tuesday. My shift started fine. If I stayed busy, the tiredness didn't hit me so hard. I put in my earbuds and listened to music while I stocked the surgery rooms with meds. It was a weeknight, so there were still some late surgeries finishing up, and housekeeping was cleaning some of the operating rooms. It's not uncommon for surgery staff to come into the room I'm in and take something they need, so I always turn around and at least smile when they walk by. I was in my own world, stocking the Omnicell machine with meds, when I heard the door behind me open. There was that distinct squeak that happens when a door's hinges need oiling, and then the loud crash of the door shutting. I turned around to see who it was, like I always do, but no one was there. I wasn't worried at first. Maybe they opened the door, saw me in the room, and decided to go somewhere else. So, I kept working and pushed my cart to the next room. The light in this room was off. I opened the door and swear I saw someone hunched over by the Omnicell machine, digging through the sharps bin. If you don't know, the sharps bin is where the used needles and vials go after surgery, instead of being thrown in a regular trash can. Someone had been caught doing this before, looking for morphine, and had been fired. I turned on the light and was about to ask what they were doing, but when the light came on, no one was there. Now I was getting a little creeped out. I didn't know the exact time frame for when hallucinations start after staying awake for over 24 hours, but I just told myself I was probably seeing things and needed to calm down. I finished stocking the surgery rooms with no other strange occurrences and headed back to the pharmacy. At 2 a.m., we have to deliver patient medications to the nurses' stations. Let me explain how the hospital floors are laid out. Each floor has 3 elevators in the middle. If you go left off the elevator, there's the 5,100 and 5,200 side. If you go right, there's the 5,400 and 5,500 side. Each side has 2 wings with 15 rooms on each side, numbered 5,105 to 5,115 on one side, and 5,201 to 5,215 on the other side. The layout is the same for every floor, but for simplicity, I'll refer to them as the 51, 52, and 54 55ths sides. Recently, the 54 55th side of the 5th floor was under renovation, so patients from that side were moved to the 3rd floor, while remodeling was happening. That night, there weren't many people in the hospital, so I made my way up, delivering meds floor by floor. When I got to the 5th floor, I went to the 51 52nd side to deliver meds and decided to check on the progress of the 54 55th side. When I got there, I just felt uneasy. There were no nurses, no patients, just long, empty hallways. The surgery rooms are usually empty and desolate most nights, so I'm used to walking around down there. No problem. But seeing empty patient rooms just creeped me out. I slowly walked down the 55 side, and as I passed room 5,512, I heard a noise that sounded like one of the hospital beds rattling. I looked into the room and saw an old man violently shaking, like he was having a seizure. Blood was coming from his eyes, nose, and mouth. He was making this horrible gargling sound, almost like a zombie. The heart monitor was going off like it does when a patient is coding. My heart dropped when I saw this, and I quickly stepped behind the door frame. But when I looked back in the room, the man was gone. The bed was clean and made, the monitor was off, and it looked like no one had been in that room for at least a day. At that point, I thought I was definitely hallucinating. I quickly left and made my way back to the elevator to go down to the 1st floor where the pharmacy is. When the elevator doors opened an old man in a security shirt with a hospital badge got on. He patted me on the shoulder as he passed, and it was the same man I had just seen having the seizure. He smiled at me as the doors closed, and I watched the elevator numbers go all the way up to the 5th floor. I didn't press any buttons for the elevator to go back down, but the same elevator came back down to the 1st floor and opened. There was no one on it. I ran back to the pharmacy and sat in a chair for the rest of my shift until my wife came to pick me up. While I was waiting, I googled when hallucinations start after not sleeping, and it said anywhere between 30 and 48 hours. I was on hour 38 of no sleep, so it made sense. The pharmacy is located directly under the 55th side, so when I walk in, I can see the window at the end of that part of the hospital. Sometimes, as I wait for the elevator, I look out the window. When I was leaving that night, I looked up at the 5th floor window and saw the same old man looking at me. I got chills. I quickly got into my wife's car, but I didn't say anything about what I had seen that night. I'm not sure why I would have hallucinated that specific man, as I've never seen him before, and he has no significance in my life. I'm still not sure if it was a hallucination or if what I saw that night was real. It definitely felt real. I went straight to sleep when I got home, and I haven't seen that man again. This happened just under 2 weeks ago. I live with my boyfriend in a house that he owns. It's a modest house in a nice neighborhood, and the crime here is usually low. I call it modest because, compared to the other houses on the street, it's on the smaller side. But having a smaller house in this neighborhood is still great because we get to live in a nice area without having to buy a super expensive home. It's a 1-story house with 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, plus a basement. Our street is really quiet, and we have a lot of privacy. The way the street curves keeps us from having neighbors directly across from us, so there's a lot of space. There are 8 houses on our block, and further down the street, there's a small wooded area. Last October, my boyfriend M went to Vegas for a bachelor party, and I was alone from Thursday to Monday. On Friday after work, I had some of my friends over for a wine night. At some point, while we were watching scary movies in the living room, the doorbell rang. We all went silent and looked at each other. The doorbell ringing in the middle of the night while we were watching a scary movie didn't feel real. I went to sneak a peek through the window to see who was outside, but I couldn't see anyone. There's a tiny glass panel at the top of the door, so I peeked through it. I saw 4 cars in the driveway, so they had to know someone was home, but I couldn't see anyone on the porch. I went back to my friends, and we all agreed it was strange, but we just thought it was someone playing a prank. Later, after everyone left, I went to bed and fell asleep quickly, but not even an hour later, I woke up to the doorbell ringing twice. I looked at my phone, and it was 1 a.m. No one should be outside at this hour. I called M, and he picked up, sounding really drunk in a loud bar. He had to step into a bathroom so he could hear me. Once he understood what was going on, he told me to stay in the bedroom and not open the door to anyone. He didn't suggest calling the police, so I didn't do that right away. We ended the call, and I tried to stay calm and go back to sleep. Just as I started to relax, I heard something outside, a clicking sound. Then there was a knock at my window. A man's voice said, "Hey, anyone home? I need some help out here." I was so glad the blinds were closed, so I couldn't see him, and he couldn't see me. Instead of leaving, he knocked again and said, "I know you're home." That's when I decided to call the police. I never heard the man leave the window, so for all I knew, he was still standing there. I whispered to the police while reporting someone trying to break into my house. You can call me dramatic, but I was scared and wanted the police there as soon as possible. Within 5 to 10 minutes, the doorbell rang again, followed by loud knocks. I went to the front door and asked who it was. A man's voice said, "It's the police." It sounded like a different voice from the man outside, so I looked through the glass and saw a couple of police officers. I opened the door for them, and right away, the taller officer walked into my house without asking. He said they were responding to my report about the disturbance. I told them there was a man ringing the doorbell and knocking on my window. I don't want to make too much of this, but that officer was the rudest person I've ever met. He acted like he was in charge and talked over me when I was trying to explain. He didn't seem to take my claims seriously. His partner didn't say a word and just stood in the back. The taller officer asked me for details I had already given, like what the man looked like, even though I had clearly said I hadn't seen him. He actually said to me, "Well, you're the one who called us, ma'am. If you don't want our help, we can leave." I was shocked. I'd never called the police before, and I didn't expect such poor professionalism. I apologized and said I was just scared. Around this time, the officers went outside to check the house with their flashlights. They walked around the entire house but didn't really check thoroughly. I watched them through the windows. They came back to the door and told me there was nothing they could do if I didn't have cameras or proof that the man had done anything wrong. Then they left. I didn't feel better at all, except maybe the man saw I had called the police. I went back to bed, and luckily, when I woke up, it was daylight coming through the blinds. It was around 10 a.m. on Saturday. That day, my friend was having a Halloween party, and I was helping set up. I went shopping, picked up things for the party, and my costume was Velma from Scooby-Doo. My friend who was throwing the party was dressing as Daphne. I got to her house around 6 p.m. and the party started at 9 p.m. It got busy around 10:30 and I stayed pretty late. I left her house a little after 1 a.m. I wasn't drunk, just had a few beers. When I got home, I immediately noticed a cold draft in the house. After setting my things down on the dining table, I saw that the window was open. I went to shut it, trying to remember why I would have opened it. Then I went to brush my teeth, and when I came out of the bathroom, I noticed the basement door was wide open. I froze. That's when I started hearing a faint but consistent clicking sound. As I got closer to the basement stairs, I realized it was coming from down there. When I got to the top of the stairs and looked down into the pitch-black basement, the clicking suddenly stopped. Then I heard a voice from below saying, "You're finally home." I slammed the basement door shut, grabbed my phone, and went outside. I banged on the neighbor's door until he answered. I decided to call the police from my neighbor's house. Unfortunately, it was the same 2 officers who had been at my house before. My neighbor came with me to talk to them, and this time, the taller cop wasn't as rude. I think having my neighbor there changed his attitude a little. The officers checked the house again, while my neighbor and I waited in the living room. After their search, I showed them places where someone might be hiding. I basically tore the house apart while on the phone with my drunk boyfriend. When I was sure no one was inside, I packed a bag to stay with my sister until M came back. This time, I made sure to lock every window before leaving. The main lesson from all of this is, if you have windows that open wide enough for someone to crawl through, make sure they're always locked when closed. We still live in the house today, but for a few months after that, I refused to be alone there for long periods. I still have PTSD from that night. And sometimes, I have nightmares where I hear knocks at the window, and then I wake up